We're on Daf Tes Zayin Amid Beis, and we'll actually have to go back to start on Tes Zayin Amid Aleph. It's just that we get the flow of things. If you're on Tes Zayin Amid Aleph, then we're going to start with the words Kol HaPsachim Shahayu Sham Utnan. So you're on the second of the wide lines. Now let's just remember that we're trying to figure out who is the author of Masechet Midos. To which Tana can we attribute the authorship of Masechet Midos? And the point of our sugya is to try to prove that it's none other than Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And in order to prove that it's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, we're going to analyze a Mishnah in Masechet Midos. We're going to try to prove that that Mishnah reflects the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And if it does, then we could assume that he is the author of Masechet Midos. Now, in order to appreciate how we're going to establish and prove that the authorship of at least one Mishnah in Masechet Midos is that of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, we're going to quote a Mishnah with regard to Parah Aduma. Now, what we have to know, and we discussed this last week, but let's review it. There's a Kohen who's called the Kohen HaSoref Es HaParah. He's out there on Har HaZeisim, and he does two things. He burns the parah, and then he takes the knife and he shechts the parah, and then he takes the dam of the parah and he does a hazah, and he sprinkles the dam, and then he burns the parah, creating the ashes of the parah. And the Torah requires the hiza, that his hazah, his sprinkling of the dam of the parah after shechita, should be el nochach pnei oel moed, which means it has to be directed, aimed at the opening of the Heichal. The oel moed is another phrase for the Heichal. As you know, the Heichal is the highest level of Kedusha in the Beis HaMikdash, and it includes the Kodesh Kadoshim. Now, how is it possible for the Kohen, who's the Soref Es HaParah, to be located on Har HaZeisim and do a Hazah, sprinkling the dam, Nochach Pnei Ol Moed? The Ol Moed, meaning the Heichal, is very, very far away from him. And the answer is that he can see from where he's standing straight away to the Heichal. And that enough will satisfy the requirement of El Nochach Pnei Ol Moed. So imagine our engineering job here is to get this Kohen standing on the Har HaZeisim, otherwise known as the Har HaMishcha, and he's able to see to the Pesach of the Heichal, the opening of the Heichal. Later on, we'll discuss the size and the width of the Pesach HaOel, the size of the Oel, the width of the Oel. We'll get into that later. Now, we have to understand that in order to get a view from the Har HaMishcha all the way to the Pesach HaOel, you have to be standing on the eastern side of the Har HaMishcha, of Har HaZeisim. And we have to understand that the structure of the Beis HaMikdash is such that when you enter into the Mikdash from the east, walking west, you will see many different gateways, sha'arim, and each one of these gateways is organized in a straight line. So, for example, there'll be a shar that'll take you into the Har HaBayis, and from the Har HaBayis there'll be another shar taking you into a place called the Heichal, and we'll discuss all these places. And then from the Heichal into the Azara, and from the Azara into the Heichal. And all this is on one beeline. You can take a line and draw it straight away from the Shar HaMizrach, which is the gateway on the eastern side of the Har HaBayis, and take a straight line, and you will end up at the opening of the Heichal. But there's a problem. And the problem is that Har HaBayis is not a flat mountain. There aren't too many. Maybe in Cape Town, you might find such a thing called Table Mount. But anyway, generally speaking, a mountain goes from a lower level to a higher level. And that is very true for the Har HaBayis. Now, if that be the case, then a person standing on the Har HaMishcha and he's looking through the Shar HaMizrach of the Har HaBayis, he's got to be somewhat elevated in order to be able to see straight away to the Pesach HaHeichal, because the Pesach HaHeichal is higher up on the mountain. But the answer to that problem, until we get to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, is that the Shar HaMizrach is very high. It's 20 amos in height, which means that if a man is standing in such a way that he could see through the opening of the Shar HaMizrach on its height up to 20 amos, then he might be able to see the Heichal. Why do I say he might be able to see the Pesach Heichal? It depends how high up, how many amos is the ascent going all the way from the Har HaBayis up to the Pesach HaHeichal. If it's less than 20 amma, then we're in good shape. Why? Because the Shar HaMizrach is 20 amas high. So you can see through the higher part, the top part of the entranceway in the Shar HaMizrach, all the way to the Heichal, because as I said, they're all lined up, one connected the other one. However, we're going to soon see that the Mishnah tells us that they had to lower the Shar HaMizrach in order to be able to see above the Shar HaMizrach and see the Pesach HaHeichal, which means that the ascent from the Har HaBayis going from east to west until you reach the Heichal is more than 20 amma. If it's more than 20 amma, then by looking through the Shar HaMizrach, he will not be able to see the Pesach HaHeichal, because the Pesach HaHeichal is higher up, and he's looking from a lower place. And the solution to that problem, offered by the Mishnah, is that we lower the Shar HaMizrach less than 20 amos, such that the Kohen can get a view above the Shar HaMizrach, which would climb up higher than the Heichal, so that he could get a view going downwards from a higher point to the Heichal. And now we have to ask the following question. How high was the Heichal relative to the Har HaBayis? Was it less than 20 amas or more than 20 amas? And that's going to be the subject of our discussion tonight, and a subject of a controversy between Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and the Chacham. So without further ado, tonight, we learned to the Mishnah again. Everyone has the place here. It's the second of the wide lines on Tezayin Amud Aleph. This is a Mishnah in Masechet Midos. Kol hapsachim shahayu sham. Every one of the entranceways, the gateways to the Har HaBayis, and from the Har HaBayis up to the Beis HaMikdash, Govan Esrim Amma, they were all 20 amos high. The Rochvan Eser Amos, they were 10 amos wide. And that means that the Shara Mizrach of the Har HaBayis was 20 amos high. And therefore, if we want to get a perfect alignment straight through from the Shara Mizrach all the way to the Heichal, we're going to have each one of the gates be 20 amos high. And I'll read you just one line in the commentary. It says, he says that we have to guarantee that the Pesach, the opening to the Heichal, would not be concealed from the eyes of the Kohen. The Kohen that we're referring to again is the Kohen Hasoref, Hashochet es Hapara v'Mazes Domer, Utnan, and the Mishnah Midos says that Lifnimi Menu, meaning when you enter east towards the west, into the Shar HaMizrach, Lifnimi Menu, the next area that you'll get to, moving from east to west, is the Soreg. What is the Soreg? The Soreg is what we call a Mechitza that separates the Har HaBayis from the Chel. And the Chel is the beginning of the Kedusha that's one step higher than the Har HaBayis. The Har HaBayis has its own basic level of Kedusha. As we move towards the Beis HaMikdash, we are increasing the Kedusha, the sanctity. And so we get to the Chel. For example, the Chel, which is on the other side of this Mechitza called the Soreg, is an area where the non-Jews would have to wait outside, so that the Chel was only for Jewish people. From there, we get to what's called the Ezras Noshim, and that's an area where only the Noshim were allowed. And then from there, we get to the Ezras Yisrael, which is where the male folk are allowed. And then from there, we get to the Ezras Kohanim, where the Kohanim did the Avodah, and that's going to lead up to what's called the Ulam, and from the Ulam to the Heichal. So these are all areas, each one of which has a Shar. So now we have Lifnim Mimenu Achel. Now, how long was the Chel? The Chel was a relatively small area, and it was 10 amos, Eser amos. And that would lead you, the Chel, to what's called the Ezras Noshim. Now, the Ezras Noshim was surrounded by a wall, a choma, and that choma had its own shar, its own gateway. Now, in order to calculate the area, or what word am I looking for? The volume, no, that's not a good word. The amount of height that we're climbing, so that we can eventually calculate how high it is from the entranceway into the Shar Mizrach and Har HaBayis all the way up to the Heichal. What we do is we count steps. Where are their steps? Shtei Mesrei Malos Hayusham. Malos in Hebrew, our spoken Hebrew, is called Madrigot, steps. And in that area called the Chel, to get from the Chel to the next area, which is the Ezras Noshim, you had to climb 12 steps. Okay, now let's see if we can calculate what is the height that you're climbing when you climb these 12 steps. Rum Mila, the Mishnah tells us, why do you have to climb these steps to get to the Ezras Noshim? Because Rum Mila, because there's a height of the Ezras Noshim. And how high is each step? Chatzi Amma, V'shilcha Chatzi Amma. It's 1/2 of an Amma in height, and it's a 1/2 an Amma in width. So we're talking about very narrow steps. And if each step is a 1/2 an Amma, and now I'm climbing 12 steps, and that means I'm climbing how many Amos? 6 Amos. Each step is a 1/2 an Amma. I'm climbing 12 steps. That's 6 Amos. So from the Har HaBayis up to the Ezras Noshim is 6 Amos. The Ezras Noshim is 6 Amos higher than the Har HaBayis. And we go on. Now, 15 malos olos mitocha. From the Ezras Noshim, we have another 15 steps to climb. And that means that we're going from the Ezras Noshim to the Ezras Yisrael. And we're climbing up another 15 steps. Once again, the purpose of these steps is Yardos Ezras Yisrael, Ezras Noshim, meaning if you're going on the way back, on your way out from the Ezras Yisrael to Ezras Noshim, you are Yardos, you go down these steps. If you're going from the Ezras Noshim to the Ezras Yisrael, you're climbing these steps. But there are 15 steps separating the Ezras Noshim on the bottom from the Ezras Yisrael on the top. And once again, Rum Maila Chatzi Amma, Shilcha Chatzi Amma. The steps were 1/2 Amma high and 1/2 Amma wide. And therefore, how many Amos is the Ezras Yisrael higher than the Ezras Noshim? 7.5. So we have now 6 Amos plus 7.5 Amos. We're up to 13.5 Amos. And furthermore, Vitnan, the next Mishnah tells us that you're now on relatively plateaued ground, which takes you from the Ezras Yisrael to the Ezras Kohanim. But now, when you want to get from the Ezras Kohanim to the next level, which is called the Ulam, once again, you have to climb higher. So there's again going to be a set of steps. Bein Ulam, La Mizbeach. The Mizbeach was in the Ezras Kohanim, what we call the Azorah. And to get from the Ezras Kohanim to the Ulam, and again, if we had time, we'll go through every purpose of the Ulam, what it functioned, but in any event, the Ulam was a very long but narrow area. Is Esrim Ushtayim Amma Ushtemesre Malos Hayusha. So it means that if you were to take a measuring rod and measure from the Mizbeach all the way to the Ulam, it would be 22 Amos. But what's important for us is if you're climbing from the Ezras Kohanim to the Ulam, you are climbing another flight of steps, 12 steps. Ruma Maila Chatzi Amma, Shilcha Chatzi Amma. And now we're going to add another 6 Amos. Okay, let's take a break now and add up what we have, if we can calculate everything we have. So we have now, let me just see if I have it. We have 12 milos to get from the Heichal to the Ezras Noshim, so that's 6 Amma. We have 15 milos to climb to get from the Ezras Yisrael to the Ezras Noshim, or the other way around, Ezras Noshim up to the Ezras Yisrael. So we've got 6 and 7.5. Okay, I should write this down. Of course, I don't have paper when I need it, but if somebody could just jot it down. So 6 plus 7.5. And now, to get from the Ezras Yisrael to the Ulam is another 12 steps, which means another 6 amma. So how much do we have now? Can anybody help me out here? 6.
Yeah, we've got 6, 7.5, 20. And another 6.
How many?
19.5.
19.5. We made it under the belt, which means that if the Pesach, if the Shar HaMizrach, where the Kohen looks through the Shar to see a straight aligned to this Heichal, and the Shar HaMizrach is 20 amas high, we're doing well. Because he's still above the Heichal. The Heichal is only 19.5 amos higher than the Har HaBayis. So he can be standing at the Har HaBayis, looking through the Shar, and he can see all the way to the Heichal. There's no need to reduce the height of the Shar. But Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, there was another Mila, there was another step. Mila Hoisa Sham, there was another step at the end of the Ezras Yisrael, and he would climb that step in order to reach the Ezras Kohanim. We didn't have that. Until now, we've been assuming that the Ezras Yisrael and the Ezras Kohanim are on the same level, plateau. V'gavoa Amma. And the size of that step, as opposed to all the other steps we discussed, is 1 amma. Not a half an amma, but a full amma. And what was located on that step? Because that step went all the way around the entire width that separated the Azara from the Ezras Yisrael, and the Duchan, which was the place where the Levium would stand, and they would recite the Shira, they would sing the Shira over the Karbanos. Nasan Aleha was placed on top of this 1 amma tall step. Ubo, Shalosh Milo Shel Chatzi Amma. So now he's talking about the Duchan. The Duchan itself had 3 steps to it. Each step was a Chatzi Am. But we're not interested in the Duchan. We're just interested in figuring out the height between the Har HaBayis and the Heichal. We have to add now, according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, another Amma. 19.5 plus 1 is 20.5. We've exceeded beyond our maximum. We were caught for speeding, so to speak. We've gone beyond the number. Is Mamela, even if he would climb up or get a view of the top of the Shar HaMizrach, which is 20 amma high, he would not be able to see the Pesach HaHeichal, because the Pesach HaHeichal is a half amma higher than the top of the Shar of the Mizrach at the bottom of this mountain, at the Har HaBayis. Mamela, what they did was, they had to lower the Shar HaMizrach. Instead of 20 amas, it was a little bit lower. And now he would be able to see above the Shar HaMizrach. I mean, again, don't take me literally, but we could sort of, what do they call those things? When they fix the robots, they take them out in this thing and they elevate them all the way on top, like an electric ladder, if you know what I mean. So if we took him an electric ladder above the top of the gate, which is called the Mashkov of the Shar HaMizrach, from there he would be able to climb up to 20.5 amas and get a view of the Heichal. If you're going to tell me that the Mishnah in Midos is authored by Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and the Mishnah says that the Kosel Mizrachi had to be lowered so that they could see above the Kosel Mizrachi the Pesach HaOel. Hainu diskasi le Pischa. We understand that if we don't lower the Shar HaMizrach and we leave it at 20 Amma high, then iskasi le Pischa, the Pesach of the Heichal, would be covered from his eye. There's no way he could see it because he's too low down, and the Heichal, the Pesach Heichal, is too high up. Now I understand why they had to lower the Shar HaMizrach. Because it would be impossible to take a view, a bird's eye view from the Shar HaMizrach and see the Pesach HaHeichal. And that's because Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov added another Amma to the calculation of the height of the Heichal. And he came up with 20 Amma and a half of an Amma. And therefore, if the Shar Mizrach was only 20 Amma high, which is very high, but it would not be enough to stand and get a view of the Pesach HaHeichal, because the Pesach HaHeichal is a half an Amma higher than the Mashkov, the post that goes across the top part of the Shar Mizrach. And therefore, what we have to do is we have to be Memayit, the Shar, the Kosel Mizrach, and it's going to have to be lowered down so you can get a view on top of the Shar Mizrach. But if you would attribute this Mishnah in Midos to the Chachamim did not add that extra Amma to connect between the Ezras Kohanim and the Ezras Yisrael. They were of the opinion that the Ezras Yisrael and the Ezras Kohanim were on the same exact level. Then Ha'ika Palga the Amsa, the Mischazele Pischa Begava. There's a half of an Amma above which the Shar Mizrach rose vis-a-vis the Pesach HaHeichal, and therefore they could see the Pesach HaHeichal through the 20 Amma high Shar Mizrach. There's no need to lower the Shar Mizrach. Lav Shmamino, therefore, from the fact that the Mishnah requires that we lower the Shar Mizrach to get a view from on top of the Shar Mizrach, it must be that this Mishnah is reflecting the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And now we're going to assume that all the Mishnayos, even when they're anonymous Mishnayos in Masechet Midos that don't mention any name, they are attributed to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So we did this entire acrobatic calculation in order to arrive at the conclusion that the Balabas, so to speak, of Masechet Midos is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Only to be rejected.
Rabbi Berzin, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to ask a question.
Please.
Isn't this oversimplified? Because how far you could see up the slope has to depend on how high up you went on Har HaZeisim. If you were lower down on Har HaZeisim, you would be looking at an angle upward.
Well, the Har HaZeisim is on the eastern side. Yeah. So it's, as he climbs down the Har HaZeisim, he gets very close to the Shar Mizrach of the Har HaBayis. And he can actually see through the Shar when he's standing on the Har Mizrach.
I mean, but think about it. If you went up to the gate the way that we've laid it out in our minds, if you put your head down near the ground, you could look up on an angle and you would see higher up the hill than if you were standing up straight. Right, but only a short
distance. We're going to soon see that the distance you have to see is 187 amos. So that if you're looking down, it's very hard to see something that's in the distance, in the far distance, at a height. And
right.
And again, we're only halfway through the calculations, but within this framework of working out the calculations, the Gemara assumes that if you can climb, so to speak, I don't mean physically climb, but I mean to say if you would get that view from the top of the Shar, you would be looking at the Pesach HaHeichal. And that would only make sense if the top of the Shar, and we're talking about the Shar of Mizrach through which you enter into the Har HaBayis, is higher than the Pesach HaHeichal. If, on the other hand, the Pesach HaHeichal is higher than the Shar because of the, I'm looking for the word in English, in topology.
The elevation, right?
Okay, great, excellent. Thank you so much. I'll use the word elevation. If the elevation is more than 20 amos, then there's no way that you can see, again, if the elevation going up the Har HaBayis all the way to the western end of the Har HaBayis, which is called the Heichal, is an elevation of more than 20 amos, then you won't be able to see the Heichal, unless you can see over the Shar HaMizrach. And the Gemara thinks that the reason why the Mishnah requires that the Shar HaMizrach be lowered in order to facilitate seeing the Pesach HaHeichal is because the Pesach HaHeichal is elevated more than 20 amos, and therefore, if you would look through the Shar, you would not be able to see the Pesach HaHeichal because the highest level that you could see would be 20 amos, and the Heichal is higher than 20 amos. And that reflects the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who added to the 19.5 an extra arm of elevation, making the Heichal at the elevation of 20.5 instead of 19.5. So once we make that transition from 19.5 to 20.5, it's no longer feasible to see the Pesach HaHeichal from the top, which I call the Mashkov, of the Shar HaMizrachi, because Shar HaMizrachi is 20 amos. That's not high enough to catch something with your eye that's elevated above 20 amos. And the only answer to that problem would be if we lower the Shar in such a way that now he can see above the Shar. Again, physically, I don't have all the details on that, exactly how he would see above the Shar if he's standing on the ground. The assumption on my part is that he had to climb up. But I don't know. I don't think that's...
No, I think maybe in between Har HaBayis and Har HaZeisim, there's a valley, right? So from down in the valley, you can't see anything. He has to climb up the Har HaZeisim, probably till he's the same elevation as the Heichal, maybe, or similar elevation to the Heichal, and then he would be able to...
Maybe you're right. Maybe that's so. But the bottom line is, for our purposes, that you have to get a view above the Shar in order to have a sight of the Heichal. Okay. Now, we're up to Rav Ada bar Ava. Rav Ada bar Ava is going to argue that the author of Masechet Midos is not Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, but rather Rabbi Yehuda. Hamani, Rav Ada bar Ava Amar Hamani, who's the author of the Mishnah? Rabbi Yehuda. In other words, we're now going to introduce an element into the equation that's going to explain why we had to have a higher bird's eye view, a higher perspective in order to see the Heichal, but has nothing to do with all the calculations that we made until now, for an entirely different reason. Meaning, until now, we've been assuming that every single Shar is aligned with the next Shar and the next Shar and the next Shar. There's nothing blocking your view. Rabbi Yehuda is now going to be introduced into the equation because he's going to have something that blocks the view from one Shar to the other. And what is it that blocks the view? That's the Mizbeach. Because according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Mizbeach is located exactly in the middle of the Azara. Now, all the Sharim are midway between east and west. So that the only way I could see straight through one shot to the next shot to the next shot until I get to the Pesach HaOel is if I assume there's nothing midway in the middle of any of the areas, whether it's the Heichal or the Ezras Noshim or the Ezras Yisrael or the Ulam and so forth. So there's nothing in the middle. But the problem is Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion, as we'll soon see, that the Mizbeach itself was situated in the middle of the Azor, midway between east and west, which means it's exactly at that line that would lead you to the Heichal. And therefore, we're going to have to find a solution by climbing above the height, the elevation of the Shar, and see above the Mizbeach in order to get a view of the Heichal. Let's see it inside. Rabbi Yehuda holds, as we said before, the Mizbeach is located in the middle of the Azora, midway, going from north to south. If you find me, we're traveling always from east to west as we enter in through these areas. But if you draw a line from north to south, let's say your line is 30 amos, the Mizbeach will be at the 15 amma line. And that's going to block your view of the Heichal, of the Pesach Heichal. And therefore, in order to guarantee, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that you could possibly see the Heichal, what you're going to have to do is, now keep in mind, the Mizbeach is actually 9 amos high. Maybe we'll get a chance to explain how we arrive at the exact height of the Mizbeach. By the way, all the midos, the measurements of the Mizbeach are perfect. In other words, we're very, very meticulous when it comes to the Mizbeach. So when I say to you that the height of the Mizbeach from the ground all the way to the Gag, the top of the Mizbeach is 9 amos, there's got to be a reason for that. And maybe we'll get a chance. It's a calculation that adds A plus B plus C. There are 3 different elements of height until we get from the ground floor, which is called the Ritzpas HaZorah, all the way to the Gag of the Mizbeach. But anyway, let's just accept it right now on faith. It's 9 amos high. And that means Utzuchu, Kevan Govo, I'm going to read to the Hebrew, Govo, the height, the elevation of the Mizbeach, so same as HaRe'iyah. It barricades, it blocks the Re'iyah from the Shara Mizrachi to the Pesach HaOel. It makes it impossible to see from the Shara Mizrachi to Pesach HaOel, because now you've got to add, now again, keep in mind, we've already passed the Chel, which was 6 amos higher to the Ezras Noshim, and another 7.5 amos to the Azorah. And the Mizbeach is located in the Azorah. So now you've got 6 plus 7.5 is 13.5. Now you add 9 because of the height of the Mizbeach. You're already exceeded 20 amos. So there's no way that you could see from the Pesach, from the Shara Mizrachi, all the way to the Heichal. Why? Because you've got to have a vision that climbs above 20 amos, which you can't do because the highest you can get at the Shara Mizrachi is 20 amos. But now, to see over the Gag of the Mizbeach, which is, according to Rabbi Yehuda, located center of the Azorah, you need 6, 13.5 plus 9 is 12.5. In other words, is 22.5 amma. See, you're already exceeded beyond the 20 amma. Did I get that right? 6 and 7.5 is 13.5 plus 9 is how much? Is 12.5. Am I right?
22.5. 22.5.
I meant to say 22.5. I said 12.5. I keep saying that, making that mistake. 22.5 amma. There's no way that you could climb to the Mashkov, the highest point of the Shara Mizrach, and see 22 amma away. Because that's, that you're going to get to 20 amma, but not to 22 amma. He says, Govo shel Mizbeach viad gago, meaning from the floor of the Azorah all the way to the roof of the Mizbeach is Teisha Amos. Nimsa shegago shel Mizbeach Govoa esrim ushtayim amu mechza. We got it right. 22.5 amah from the Shara Mizrachi. The Kevin Shegova Sharu Esrim Amma Nimtza Shamizbeach so same es Kulo. He can't possibly see beyond the Mizbeach. In fact, he won't even be able to see the top of the Mizbeach, let alone beyond the Mizbeach. His view is blocked. Therefore, we're going to have to lower the Shar HaMizrach such that he can get a view way above the Shar HaMizrach. Again, whether it has to do with the relationship between the Har HaBayis and the Har HaZeisim, or maybe he was lifted up, that detail I don't have worked out. Now, I just want to take a moment to see if we can calculate why and how we know that the height of the Mizbeach is 9 amos. So he doesn't, as far as I can tell, my commentary, I'm using the Masifta, he doesn't mention anything about that. However, at the beginning of Masechet Yoma, he has some very nice pictures. And I think if we look at the pictures, we'll be able to figure this all out. Again, this is a little bit of a digression, but I'm very curious about the Mizbeach. When it comes to Mizbeach, they're very meticulous about all the calculations of the Mizbeach. So let me just see if you give me a minute to find this. Okay, maybe I found it. Let's see. Okay. The Mizbeach is made of 3 sections. From the bottom to the second to the third. Now let's keep in mind that each one of these sections, or you might call them platforms, we'll see, are square. They have to be absolutely square. And the squares get shorter as you go up. The broadest platform is called the Yesod HaMizbeach. The Yesod HaMizbeach is 1 amah high. Then you have a second ribua, a second square, which begins 1 amah high and climbs 5 amah. That's called the Sovev. And that was used for the Kohanim to walk around the Mizbeach in order to do the Zrika on the upper half of the Mizbeach. So we now have climbed up 6 amah from the ground, 5 plus 1. Then, how tall, how much of an elevation is there from the Sovev until the Gag of the Mizbeach? 3 amos. So you've got 1, which is the Yesod, 5, which is the Sovev, gets you to 6. And from the Sovev until the flat part, which is called the Gag HaMizbeach, is another 3 amos, is 6 plus 3 is 9. Now, in truth, I don't want to fool you, but just for the sake of truth, the Mizbeach is actually 10 amos high. Why? Because on top of the Gag HaMizbeach, there was what's called the Kronos HaMizbeach. Each Karen on each of the 4 corners was 1 amah high. But that's not relevant to our sugi because we're talking about obstructing someone's vision. And the Kronos were only on the corners 1 amah high. So that would not obstruct the vision. So as far as obstruction of vision is concerned, the magic number is 9 amos. Now, getting back to our sugya, how do we know that Rabbi Yehuda positions or situates the Mizbeach in the middle of the Azara? The Sanya, we learned in the Brisa, this is Masechet Zvachim, Daf Nun Ches Amud Beis. Rabbi Yehuda Omer HaMizbeach Memutza V'Omed V'Emtza Azara. In other words, when you talk about the width of the Azara going from north on the right side, the south on the left side, the Mizbeach is directly in the middle. Why? Because from north to west is 32 amos. Hayula. The width of the Mizbeach was 32 amos. And once again, very meticulous calculations. And here we start on Daf Tezayin Amud Beis. Now, how wide was the Pesach HaHeichal? Again, our whole discussion tonight is all about the Pesach HaHeichal. How wide was the Pesach HaHeichal? 10 amos wide. Now, the Mizbeach is situated, according to Rabbi Yehuda, right there in the middle of the Azar. Now, the Mizbeach is Eser Amos Keneged Pischot Shel Heichal. We said that the Mizbeach is 32 amos wide. 10 amos, the middle 10 amos in the Mizbeach, are exactly aligned to the 10 amos of the Pesach HaHeichal. So we're going to subtract 10 from the entire width of the Mizbeach, which we said was 32 amos. So we're left with 22 amos. And they will be equally divided on both sides of the Mizbeach, because the Mizbeach is in the middle, 10 amos in the Pesach HaHeichal. You'll have 11 amos towards the north, and another 11 amos in the Mizbeach stretching towards the south, totaling 11, 11, and 10, 32 amos. Achadesrei amo l'tzofon, v'achadesrei amo l'doron. Nimtza hamizbeach mechuvan keneged heichal v'koslav. What does he mean v'koslav? In other words, the Pesach HaHeichal is made of A plus B. It's got the halal, the airspace, right, between the two ksalim, the walls of the Pesach HaHeichal. If you add the walls and the airspace, you will come to the calculation of 10 amos. And the Mizbeach is exactly 10 amos wide in the middle of the Azara, with 11 amos on the right and 11 amos on the left, and that's Tzafon and Doron. So Rav Ada bar Rava says that there's no need to interpret the Mishnah and Midos according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and assuming that we have to go above the Shar HaMizrach because of that extra amma of elevation. Forget about the elevation. I have a different problem because it's Rabbi Yehuda's the author of the Mishnah in Midos. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, since the Mizbeach is located right in the middle, and its middle width of 10 amos is exactly aligned to the Pesach HaHeichal, no way, therefore, that you could see. And again, in terms of elevation from the Har HaBayis, we came to the calculation of 22.5 amos. There's no way that you could see above the Mizbeach to the Heichal unless you get a higher view, which would mean that we lower the Shar HaMizrach so that we can climb above it and see all the way to the Heichal from above the Shar HaMizrach. And that means that our Mishnah that lowers the Shar HaMizrach is not a reflection of the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, but rather of the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And if we find one Mishnah that's authored by Rabbi Yehuda, we can assume the Gemara's premise is that the entire Masechet Midos is attributed to Rabbi Yehuda. And now the Gemara wants to reject Rav Ado bar Am. Isal kedaita midos to Rabbi Yehudi. Ha! You're telling me that the author of Masechet Midos is Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara, that can't be. Because Rabbi Yehuda situates the Mizbeach where? In the middle of the Azara. I'm going to prove to you that according to Masechet Midos, the Mizbeach is not situated in the middle of the Azara. And therefore, Masechet Midos could not possibly be attributed to the authorship of Rabbi Yehuda. And we're going to have to go back to our original interpretation of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Isal kedaitach midos Rabbi Yehuda is Mizbeach the Emta Azara mimich kachasla? Do we find any sort of Mishnah in Masechet Midos that could reflect the shita that the Mizbeach is in the middle of the Azara? V'atnan, I'm going to quote a Mishnah. In this case, we're fast forwarding to the 5th parak of Masechet Midos, and I'm going to prove to you that the Mizbeach is not situated, according to the Mishnah in Midos, in the middle of the Azara. Kol Azara. Now, we have to understand that there's something called the Azara, and then there's something called Kol HaZara. Kol HaZara includes not just what we call the Azara, where the Mizbeach was, and where the Kohanim did the daily avodah, but it also, Kol HaZara includes the Heichal as well. And in effect, I mean, I'm just making this comment according to what I understand. The phrase Kol HaZara is like the Beis HaMikdash. What do I mean, the Beis HaMikdash? I mean, the Beis HaMikdash has the Chel and the Ezras Noshim, the Ezras Yisrael, but that's not what the Beis HaMikdash is really all about. Beis HaMikdash is about avodah, and the avodah begins in the Azara, and it continues to its apex to include the Heichal. And there were many avodas that were done inside the Heichal, and then we're including also the Kodesh Kadosh. So we're going to add together, number one, what we call bayis, and number two, what we call chotzer. Bayis is made up of 3 elements: ulam, heichal, and kodesh kadosh. And chotzer is made up of what we call the Ezras Kohanim and the Ezras Yisrael. Those are called chotzer. And what is the entire length of this area, beginning with the Ezras Yisrael, ending up in the Kodesh Kadoshim? Hoisa orech 187 amos, from east going to west, beginning with the Ezras Yisrael, ending up at the far west, which is the Kodesh Kadoshim, is 182 amos. What's its width? Now we're going from north to south. Is 135 amos. So if you want to take the entire area called Kol HaZara, which includes both the bayis and the chotzer, then you're talking about an area that is 187 amma by 135 amma. I guess you'd call it a rectangular shape. It's not a square. Min ha-mizrach ulamala, lamarov, 187. This area going from east to west, which we said was 187 amma from the Ezras Yisrael all the way to the Kodesh Kadoshim, is Makom Drisas Raglei Yisrael. This is the area that a Jew is allowed to enter into. How so? How do you get, the Mishnah wants to explain how you arrive at this calculation of 187 Amma. Achadesrei Amma. In other words, if you're talking first about the Ezras Yisrael and you're going from east to west, the Ezras Yisrael is 11 amos going from east to west. And that's called Makom Drisas Ragli Yisrael. Yisrael meaning, even if you're not a Kohen, you're a male, you're allowed to enter into the Ezras Yisrael and travel from east to west 11 amma, traversing the Ezras Yisrael. Now you're up to the Ezras Kohen. Makom Drisas Ragli Kohenim, Achatesrei Amma. So we're adding now another 11 amma for the Ezras Kohen. So what number are we up to now? 22 amma. Again, I need you to write this down. 22 amma. Now, from the Mizbeach to the Ulam is 32 amma. So we're going to add 32 amma to 22 amma. Just 1 second. Did I get that right? It's supposed to end up at 54. Did it end up at 54? Okay, good. Okay, so we're 54, and we're up to the Ulam. From the Ulam to Mizbeach is 22 amma. And we were at 54. So if we had 54 and 22, we are now at 76. The Heichal, which means the Ulam, the Heichal, and the Kodesh Kodashim is Mea amma. So we were at 76, and now we had 100, we're at 176. We're still not at 187. The Achadesrei Amma, to make up that difference, is Achorei Beis HaKaporos. In other words, if you travel west beyond and behind the Kodesh Kodashim until what's called the Kosel HaMaravi of the Azara, it's 11 amma. So now we're going to add 11 amma to 76 amma plus 100 amma, and we arrive at 187 amma. Okay. Now that's as far as traveling from the entranceway east all the way to the west, including the last 11 amma beyond the Kodesh Kodashim on the other side of the Kaporos. What about the width from north to south? We said that was 135 amma. How do we get that? Min Adoram Litzafon, 135 amma. Kesad, how do we get to that? Hakevesh ve'amizbeach shishim ushtayim amos. Okay, the mizbeach, we said, if you recall, was 32 amos in width on the bottom, meaning from the yesod. And the kevesh was another 30 amma, right? The kevesh is the ramp that was adjacent to the mizbeach. And the width of the kevesh, of the ramp, was 30 amma. So now we're going to add 30 amma to 32 amma. So what are we up to? Just 1 second. I'm sorry. We said that what? That the kevesh is 30 amma. Oh, I see. I skipped something. I'm sorry. My mistake. So again, we have the width of the mizbeach is 32 amma, and the width of the kevesh is 30 amma. We're up to 62 amma. Okay. Min ha-mizbeach v'ad l'tabos. Okay, there was an area designated in the Azora for the shchitas hakarbanos, And there were tabos. These were gigantic rings, and they put the animal inside the ring so that the Kohen could check the animal. And the distance between the Mizbeach and the tabos, and again, we're moving from north to south, is how much? Is Shmona Amos. Now, Mokom HaTabaos, so again, we went from the Mizbeach to the Tabos, right? So we're now, the closest of the Tabos to the Mizbeach is 8 Amos, and now the Tabos themselves spread out, also from north to south, Esrim v'Arba, 24 Amos. Mina Tabos l'Shulchanos, so they had marble tables, and that's where they did what's called the Hadochas HaKirbayim. They took the Karbanos and they put them after the Shechita and after the Zrika onto these Shulchanos Shel Shayish, and that's where they did the Hafshatas Ha'or, and that's Arba Amos. Min HaShulchanos L'Nanosim, these were the very small poles or pillars that were in the ground. And that's where they had vavim. They had, on these pillars, they attached hooks, and they would put the animal after the hafshata on the hook. And that's where they were able to remove the hides, the or. Sometimes the or was given to the owner of the carbon, that's shlomim. In other cases, it was given to the kohanim as payment for their service. And that's another arbams. Min ananosim, from these little pillars, la kosel azara, we're now on the northern side, which is towards your right, is another shmona amos. Ve'amosar, and the amos that were left, because we're still short 21 amos, you'll have to make the calculation if you have it in front of you, is that's bein hakevesh lekosel. You have to calculate the area from, let's say, all the way on the right side of the kevesh up to the kosel, which is the southern kosel of the Azora, umakom ananosim, and the place where the pillars were, and that's going to make up the difference of the 21 amos. And finally, we add the makom ananosim, which is 11 and a half amos. We arrive at the number 135 amos. If you're going to argue that Midos was authored by Rabbi Yehuda, and the Mizbeach is therefore in the middle of the Azara, is then Mizbeach b'emtza Azara mimishkachasla. According to all the Midos, the calculations of the Azara that we mentioned before, it would be impossible for the Mizbeach to be in the middle of the Azara, such that, according to Rabbi Barav, it blocks the view of the Pesach HaHeichal. Why? Because Haruba the Mizbeach Adoram Koi. All right, I see we went over time. So this last piece here, which again is sort of like the end of our discussion, which is called Ruba the Mizbeach Adoram Koi, I think we'll leave that for next week, because that requires a lot of diagrams and so forth and so on. So I'll give you a homework assignment between now and next Wednesday, that you should go through this sugya of Ruba de Mizbeach B'Daram. And what does that mean? Okay then? So let me wish you a great week, and as usual, thank you for joining.